Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Leaked documents reveal shocking Supreme Court news.
Never before in modern history has an internal draft been leaked to the public while the justices were still deciding a case.
Could Roe versus Wade be overturned? But first, Amber Heard's team calls its first witness to the stand.
I diagnosed Ms. Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Plus, Johnny Depp's team rests its case after expert testimony.
Mr. Depp suffered lost earnings of approximately $40 million.
And later, how did the Washington Post op-ed affect Depp's reputation?
The public thinks he's damaged.
We are live in Fairfax, Virginia for day 13 of the contentious case. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. Johnny Depp rests his case in the multi-million-dollar defamation case against ex-wife Amber Heard. Law&Crime Network's Jesse Weber was inside the courtroom for Depp's final witness. And Jesse, you saw the first witness called by Heard's defense team.
That's right, Brian. Today was about the end of one case, the start of another, and a major development that happened outside the presence of the jury. In fact, the day started off with continued testimony of Amber Heard's nurse, Erin Filati, who talked about some of the mental and physical conditions she observed of her during her relationship with Depp. And from there, we moved to the testimony of forensic accountant Michael Spindler, who estimated that Depp suffered lost earnings of $40 million after 2018. That's the year that the Washington Post article was published. And then after Spindler, Johnny Depp officially rested his case, but the drama didn't stop there because Heard's team argued a motion to strike, basically trying to dismiss the case, but that was ultimately denied. Well, with at least respect to two of the statements in the article. The third statement at issue, the judge said that she's going to review later on because we may learn that Heard didn't even write it. And now the first witness to testify, as you said, for Amber Heard was clinical and forensic psychologist Dr. Dawn Hughes. And she basically explained that a victim of domestic violence can act out and behave in all the ways that Amber Heard has been accused of behaving, including yelling, physically fighting back. And in fact, Dr. Hughes examined Heard, and this was her conclusion.
The main opinion is that Ms. Heard's report of intimate partner violence and the records that I reviewed is consistent with what we know in the field about intimate partner violence, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors. Ms. Heard demonstrated very clear psychological and traumatic effects or the exacerbation of trauma from those statements that Mr. Depp made through his attorney. There were 3 statements that we evaluated to see how they affected her emotionally and psychologically, and it was my determination that they did.
And did you arrive at any diagnostic conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And what were those?
I diagnosed Ms. Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder. In order to meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to have an actual cause. It's one of the few diagnostic entities that we have to have a cause for, and the cause was the intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp. That was what was pushing the symptoms. That was what's related to the intrusive phenomena. That was related to her avoidance. That was related to her differences in her mood. That was related to her avoidance efforts. So it was the cause was the intimate partner violence by Mr. Depp.
Now, that is in direct contrast to the testimony of Dr. Curry, who testified for Johnny Depp's side. So this is just more conflicting and complicating testimony for the jury to ultimately sort out. Brian?
All right, Jesse, before we get into Dr. Hughes' testimony, who I won't confuse for Dr. Curry, how did the Depp team finish off their case? Did they end on a strong note?
Yeah, I mean, what they did was try to tie it all together by saying, at the end of the day, this is what happened to Johnny Depp after the 2018 Washington Post article. He lost $40 million. He lost the potential earnings of $40 million. He lost Pirates of the Caribbean 6. His reputation has never been the same. That was one of the weaknesses in his case when it first started off, and I think they really tied it together towards the end. Now, would I have preferred maybe to see Johnny Depp be the last witness and put a bow on it? Sure, but at the end of the day, they did everything they could.
All right. Now, Jesse, Dr. Hughes on Tuesday only did her direct, and she took issue, as you said, with Dr. Curry's interpretation. Did that direct dismantle Dr. Curry's findings, in your opinion?
You have two conflicting experts. That's the problem. You have two conflicting experts, and that you see that in a lot of different cases. At the end of the day, it's going to be up to the jury to determine who's more credible. And when you have this, it's a tough decision because both are very well qualified and both spoke very well. So it's a tough decision for the jury, but direct contrast from what we heard from Depp's side.
Now, Jesse, I'm curious as to what you think about this. For the first time, I started to see emotion come from Amber Heard throughout the testimony. What was your reaction to that, and did the jury react in any way either?
So I didn't see the jury really looking too much at Amber Heard, and you know what's interesting about watching her is the testimony of Dr. Hughes, where said you can have somebody who's stoic, does not show much emotion on the outside, but then is filled with emotion on the inside. I will tell you, aside from Amber Heard, looking at the different people in the gallery, when Dr. Hughes was testifying, my guess is they were mostly Johnny Depp supporters because I saw a number of people shaking their heads, whispering. That was a gallery filled with mostly, it seemed to be Johnny Depp supporters. So it's going to be very interesting to see how her testimony continues and what everyone makes of it.
All right, Jesse, hold on tight. We'll be right back with you for more inside look at this case. Thank you so much for it. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, our Johnny Depp and Amber Heard coverage continues. Hear expert witness testimony about Depp's financial loss following the release of the 2018 op-ed. But does the witness hold up on cross? That's next on Law and Crime Daily. Back. Our coverage continues now as exes Johnny Depp and Amber Heard face off in a Virginia court. On Tuesday, Depp's team called its final witness, an expert who testified to Depp's economic damages.
I concluded that Mr. Depp suffered lost earnings of approximately $40 million.
How did you reach that conclusion?
Well, there are really two main components to that. The first relates to the loss of the role of Captain Jack Sparrow in the Pirates 6 film. Well, the other main component to this is taking a look at all the other roles, the non-franchise films. So those films, studio films, independent films, and endorsements that Mr. Depp realizes and enjoys.
And you're assuming, for the purposes of your report, that the damages that you're testifying about were caused by Amber's op-ed, correct?
Yes.
So you're therefore not looking into whether anything else that's happened with Mr. Depp's life or career could have caused him economic damages, correct?
I believe that's generally correct, yes.
You're not looking at whether the worsening performance at the box office of Mr. Depp's movies over time has caused him the damages that you're testifying about, correct?
Correct, and I'm not acknowledging any of this being accurate. I'm just saying that that wasn't part of my calculations.
Sure, I understand. I just want to make clear what you didn't look at.
We're joined today by Law and Crime legal analyst Kirk Nurmi, co-host Terry Austin, and correspondent Jesse Weber live from the field. Kirk, if we're looking at the numbers, Spindler brought those on Tuesday in court for sure, but do you think his research held up on cross?
You know, ultimately I do. Well, this is the best cross-examination I saw from Heard's team throughout this entire trial. And they got out the reality that there's a bit of speculation to it. The speculation he put forward seemed to be based on sound reasoning. There's never going to be any exact tangibility to it. So if the jury believes that Mr. Depp was defamed, I think this witness gave them enough in order to get that $50 million figure that Mr. Depp is requesting.
Now, Terry, we heard Jesse talk about he would want Depp to be the last witness, but why do you think Depp's team chose strategically to end with Spindler as its final witness, and was that a good call?
Well, I don't think it was a bad call, and I don't disagree with Jesse. I think having Depp as the final witness is a great call, but this is a forensic accountant. So Spindler was able to explain to the jury just how Depp lost that money because of Heard's defamatory statements. He was able actually to confirm Jack Wiggum's testimony, that estimate at $40 million. He talked about the fact that the money was lost from Pirates 6. He talked about the studio and independent films. So that was important to end on a really scientific note. And don't forget, they began with Christy, the sister. She gave the soft background. Ending with hard numbers, not a bad call.
Yeah. Jesse, it seems like Amber Heard has an uphill battle uphill battle, after Depp's case. But how do you think she started off so far?
She did a great job because she reset the narrative and explained away all of this objectionable or abusive behavior that, oh, Amber Heard hit Johnny Depp because she was in a reactive self-defense manner. This is what Dr. Hughes said. Dr. Hughes also testified that this is somebody who would yell at her partner. This is somebody who might not report violence that's inflicted upon her because of the circumstances of the situation. She also talked about the bystander effect. Maybe a number of witnesses from Johnny Depp's side wouldn't testify because they're not going to testify against somebody that employs them or that they like or that they don't want to get involved in that relationship. And so explaining all of this behavior away, which is what Johnny Depp has been putting forward for the past 3 weeks, and explaining it away in the first hour is a huge advantage to Amber Heard as we are setting up for her to take the stand and explain away everything.
Yeah, absolutely paves the way for Amber Heard to testify. I think it's smart to have an expert like this testify to kind of lay the groundwork, and then we'll see Amber Heard hopefully later this week. Jesse, as always, thank you for the stellar reporting.
Thank you.
Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the Johnny Depp-Amber Heard defamation case gets analytical. Depp's expert witness breaks down the internet trends following the release of the infamous op-ed. Welcome back. We continue now with our Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard coverage. Analytics experts testify Depp's reputation took a negative turn after Heard's 2016 abuse allegations and again after the 2018 op-ed.
You know, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to analyze the Q scores during this snapshot of time. I wanted to understand what they were before, during, and after the op-ed. And what this tells me is his positive Q score went from a 35 to a 29, and then his negative went from an 11 to a 15. So what the Q scores is telling me is the public perception of Mr. Depp has been damaged. You know, they like him less and they dislike him more.
Based on all of the analyses that you completed in this case, what are your final opinions about Mr. Depp's reputation over this period of time?
Yeah, so my opinions are that, you know, Mr. Depp was not portrayed in a negative connotation prior to the 2016 allegations of abuse. And then Mr. Depp's image, he was portrayed in a negative connotation after the 2016 allegations of abuse, and then more so after the 2018 Washington Post op-ed. And then the Q scores represent that, you know, the public thinks he's damaged. They think less likely of him. His positive Q score has gone down, and they don't like him even more because his negative Q score went from the 11 to the 15.
Terry, important testimony, but do you think Depp's team got a little too technical with a loss of reputation? Was there perhaps an easier, more powerful way to do this line of testimony, I guess?
You know, it was important. I think Doug Benia is the internet analytics expert, and it was very technical, but it was necessary. You know, to have to prove your case, you have to show specifics. And I think that the jury probably missed some of that. They know from their own experience whether or not Johnny Depp's reputation went up or went down. But what they had to do was outline specifically what was said and how that impacted his reputation. And they did that. Don't forget, they had the ACLU individual, Terrence Daugherty. They had him up there, and he was able to connect the drafts of the Washington Post article directly to Johnny Depp. That was important. And then, you know, having the analytics expert was also important. Having Richard Marks, he was the Hollywood expert. He talked about how media affects people. That was important. And then finally, it ended on Spindler, and he was the one who talked about, you know, from an accounting standpoint, how it affected him financially. So all of that's important. It could be a little bit too technical, but I think the jury probably caught the important parts of that testimony.
Yeah, Kirk, we're used to covering blood spatter and cell phone pinging here at the Law and Crime Daily. But do you think this testimony of Google Trends will be helpful in a similar way to this case?
I think so, Brian, because you're right. You know, DNA and fingerprints and all those things bring a lot of tangibility to a jury in terms of deciding whether to convict someone of a crime which they're charged. We have to keep in mind, though, that this is a little bit different arena, not just in the civil sense, but we're talking about damages, right? So one step that the Depp team had to do is prove that he was defamed, right? So if they have proven that through his testimony or some of the other witnesses that Terry referenced, then the question becomes, what are the damages? What kind of tangibility can be placed on that in order to make a jury feel comfortable with the figure? And I think this witness did that. It brought it forward and said, okay, this is the damages. While it's not perfectly tangible, it gives the jury enough to feel comfortable rendering a verdict of $50 million, which is going to be something that people might not be able to wrap their heads around, but it gives this jury enough in order to deliver that into the courtroom.
Yeah, I think our producers actually said it the best. She said it's something that the jury can really sink their teeth into, and I think it gives them something tangible to really think about. We'll see how they end up deciding this case as it continues. Thank you both. To keep up with the gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, make sure to follow our newest podcast, Law&Crime Sidebar. Listen in as Law&Crime's top hosts recap the highs and lows of the trial so far, straight from the Fairfax County Courthouse in Virginia. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or online at lawandcrime.com. When we come back, a shocking revelation straight from the Supreme Court of the United States. What leaked documents have to say about the Roe v. Wade SCOTUS ruling. Welcome back. A days-long manhunt for an Alabama corrections officer who officials believe helped an inmate escape is still ongoing. Casey White was serving a 75-year sentence and awaiting a capital murder trial when he and the assistant director of corrections at the Lauderdale County Detention Center went missing Friday. Vicky White is now facing charges. The two are not related. Officials shared a video showing Vicky driving when she was last seen Friday taking Casey, who was shackled in her patrol car, for a mental health evaluation at the county's courthouse. Authorities believe she was acting of her own free will. A big obstacle for law enforcement now is that they don't know what vehicle the two are driving after her patrol car was found abandoned. And there is no clear motive as to why she would have done this. In a statement, the county sheriff says Vicky's co-workers and other county officials have the utmost respect for her. The sheriff says for months she had talked about retiring and had even submitted her retirement papers just days before the two disappeared. And the Supreme Court is expected to strike down Roe v. Wade according to a leaked draft of an opinion repealing the landmark decision. Now Democratic senators are responding, calling for legislation to codify abortion access into law. If passed, the initial draft majority opinion written by Justice Samuel Alito would be the end to the federal constitutional protection of abortion rights and a succeeding 1992 decision of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. In the document, Justice Alito writes Roe and Casey must be overruled and that the issue of abortion should be returned to, quote, the people's elected representatives. It would allow for each state to decide on restricting or banning abortions. After hearing oral arguments, 4 of the other Republican-appointed justices voted with Alito in December. The leak of the draft is a rare breach of SCOTUS secrecy and tradition surrounding its deliberations. On Tuesday, senators on both sides spoke out about the disclosed opinion.
Now that the court is poised to strike down Roe, it is my intention for the Senate to hold a vote on legislation to codify the right to an abortion in law. A vote on this legislation is not an abstract exercise. This is as urgent and real as it gets.
Never before in modern history has an internal draft been leaked to the public while the justices were still deciding a case. Never before. Whoever committed this lawless act knew exactly what it could bring about. The justices already require security.
SCOTUS is expected to issue a decision in the next couple of months. Kirk, Chief Justice Roberts has confirmed this draft is real, so we could see Roe v. Wade being overturned. What do you think of Alito's argument that abortions are not a liberty, quote unquote, under the 14th Amendment?
I think it fails to recognize the fact that it has been a liberty under the 14th Amendment for nearly 50 years now. It has become one of those inherent liberties that we have enjoyed in most of our lifetimes. So, and he wants to kick it back to being a morality issue, which could really evidence a big sea change in many different cases: reproductive freedom, marital freedom, all those sort of things. So it's a very big sea change is coming if this opinion comes out as it is.
Yeah, I know some people have been a bit alarmed in this, but what about Virginia v. U.S. and other marital issues as well that so many people are affected by? Terry, if this ruling goes through, what does it mean for abortion rights in the United States as a whole and blue states versus red states?
Well, you know, Kirk mentioned the C wave, and that's exactly what will happen. We already know that there are trigger laws in place in approximately 20 or so states where if this ruling comes down, and there's no reason to think it won't, then we'll have laws that will either ban or severely restrict abortions. And so I think that we're going to see women in particular looking to go to other states where they will have more liberties. And so there'll be some forum shopping, and I think that's a shame. I think that this is one of those unenumerated rights in the Constitution that should be upheld as precedent.
Yeah, let me just quickly correct myself. Loving v. Virginia is the case I was talking about. Well, thank you both, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.